All right, we are live. And on today's episode, I interview a podcaster and entrepreneur obsessed with business models of media, propaganda, and art. Welcome to the winner circle, Sky King.
Thanks, Derek. Happy to be here, bro.
It's very exciting to catch up with you. We missed each other in the Dominican Republic earlier this year, and it's been a few years since we last connected. And we connected kind of at the beginning of your journey in Austin, Texas, and I kind of got to see that grow. And then you just exploded and expanded from then. So it's very excited to just explore that journey, that hero journey you've been on.
Yeah, dude, for sure. Yeah, it's been a minute since we've got to connect, but I always enjoyed hanging out with you back in the On It days, pre-COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether that was in the cafe or in the gym or the training. Yeah, it's nice to see you. These conversations are always just generally set up very positive and uplifting. And the first question sets us up as such. And Sky, that is, what do you love about your personal world right now? Not about all the stuff going on the outside, but what do you love about your very personal world?
I mean, the thing that is the most like overwhelmingly positive that I had like no really context for how great it would be having my daughter Athena. She's gonna be 5 months in like a week, and it's been one of the most transformative experiences I've ever had. Like her birth felt very psychedelic. I feel like I understand my parents so much more. I feel like I understand their love for me, and that like even though when they pass that'll die, but like it transmutes like forward through her. There's no drug like her smile. It's so overwhelmingly positive, and there are definitely challenges. You have greater responsibilities, but the positives outweigh the negatives so much. I can't, if you have if you're given the gift of opportunity to have a kid, I definitely would dive in because it is pretty fantastic.
Hmm. What was like one of the biggest ahas that you've had so far in the 5 months with Athena?
Yeah, I mean the really the craziest thing to kind of double down on the almost psychedelic aspect of it was the first time I held her like against my chest. I saw in my mind's eye like a vision of of love riding down the double helix, surfing the double helix of my ancestry all the way through to me. And it was just like and then like blasting through me to her, and it felt like this crazy connection to like all of my ancestors and everything that has happened from this moment to exist and for Athena to exist and like the unlikelihood and yet the inevitability of it. And that to me was just so mind blowing. Also, I don't know, I've had like different levels of anxiety throughout my life, and so much of my internal anxiety has gone away now. Like I don't really have internal anxiety anymore. I like externalize anxiety onto her in certain ways, but like the weird worry isn't about myself anymore. And that is just so gratifying. I think again, I think psychedelics is a really good way to compare it to because it's ineffable. Like you cannot describe it. It's really hard to put it into words, but it is so powerful. And I think, a lot of young men right now, and I experienced this a lot in my early 20s, they struggle a lot with the meaning crisis. Like, how do they give meaning to their lives? They're looking externally to try and do something, make something of themselves, to try and search for meaning. And it's like, holy shit, just have a kid. That meaning crisis just disappears because you have inherent meaning with everything that you do and every decision that you make.
Mm. What's your vision for your daughter? What's your greatest, highest vision for Athena?
Yeah, I try not to be too prescriptive for her existence, but I think if I can hope something for her, I hope that she finds things that she loves in life and that, she has a perspective. Um, like finds ideas, finds people, finds activities, you know. That's kind of the hope. I also hope that she ends up finding a great partner and having a great marriage and having great children too, because I want her to experience this as well. But I don't really believe in being overly prescriptive for her. I just want the best for her, whatever that means to her.
Hmm. So, Sky, what are those things for you? What are the ideas, people, things, activities that you're currently in love with?
Yeah, if we're going outside of family stuff, for me it really is around podcasting and the impact of podcasting. So right now we're in one studio that Ryan and I founded together, and then there's another studio next door that I'm in the process of building, and I just want to be an artist. And what that looks like for me is even to the studio level. Like I created this aesthetic called Edo Punk, which basically takes cyberpunk and connects it with a lot of the visual and temporal experiences of Edo, Japan, which is was a city basically under the shogunate. It's where Tokyo is today. Um, but it was a city that was very temporary in nature. It almost burned down completely 4 times and had hundreds and hundreds of fires throughout its history. It was also a really interesting time period because there's a huge authoritarian regime with the shogunate at the very top of society. And then below it, at almost equal levels, was the merchant class and the courtesan class. So it was a city based on hedonism and pleasure, and it was probably the most hedonistic society that had ever existed, like probably more than Rome up until today, until nowadays. And I just think like I'm building this art and this cyberpunk, Edo punk idea and aesthetic because I want to have endearing conversations. Like amongst the ephemeral, which is this not lasting thing that is the internet. People will run fucking hundreds of miles of marathons, hundreds of marathons via their fingers right now. And it's this constant ephemeralness of the internet where nothing is staying, nothing is enduring. It's just almost just like a short form malaise. And I just love this idea of amongst that chaos, having enduring long form meaningful conversations. And so like I'm taking it super seriously going into this year. The aesthetic of the studio is going to be just probably one of the coolest studios like ever fucking made, I think. I'm pretty optimistic about it. I wanted to like design a lot of artwork around it too, all the way to like the clothes that we wear and do like merch launches, and that it's like this very aesthetic, beautiful experience within my podcast, and then just have epic conversations around like critical thought and understanding propaganda, understanding the media environment today, and then how we can mature as a society so that we can mature with the power of God we've been given, which is the internet and is technology and this leverage that like, even Hercules, whatever the guy's name that said, give me a lever long enough and I'll pick up the world, that he couldn't have imagined. But we need to mature as a culture with that. And so having conversations that are fun, exciting, entertaining, but also help think deeply about that maturation process.
That's so fucking exciting, Sky. I'm so curious, like, what was the inspiration that's kind of like that set the foundation to all this that you're building?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it goes back to my dad in a lot of ways. My dad was an entrepreneur who, like, money was never important for him. He grew up very, very poor, was very successful, and then kind of like spent it all on ideas, which is like I think I'm fine. I think it's pretty cool. But like he just looked at capitalism as this opportunity to leverage capitalism to change the world for good. And he did a lot of stuff around women's sports and women's tennis and women's rights, um, that gave so much opportunity to young women only because he wanted the world to feel more, have more equality of opportunity. And I learned at a very young age that you can leverage capitalism to change the world. And so always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't know what it would look like. And then I was working in big pharma, which is the opposite of where I had intended to go with my life, and or the opposite of where my parents had intended probably for me to go if they did have intentions. They were confused. Everyone's confused. I was confused, and I was just like flying back and forth between New York City and Indianapolis twice a week, and I was just seeing these two divergent realities of like New York, big mainstream media, and then what was being said on podcast. And I realized in that moment that if we can change the business model of media, if we can decrease the influence of advertising within mainstream media or within what is the most popular media today, then we can fundamentally change our sense-making apparatus for the world, which is the like kind of culture cohesion that's created through podcasting, or sorry, through the media. And I was like, oh shit, this is my thing. And so I moved down to Austin to work with Aubrey. Kind of became obsessed, tried to build as like big of a business, best connections as I could into podcasting. We were kind of basically the moat between brands and podcasters, and still are. And I kind of built a company that instilled these values into my team so that we represent the podcasters versus the advertisers and the brands. And now I've gotten to a place where that's done well enough that I can go 100% focused on my art and on actually building what I think will be kind of my vision for the future around this. And I thought about trying to build companies. I did a bunch of experiments in crypto where we kind of start to build technology to allow people to play around with different business models of media. And then I realized like I really don't want to be CEO of a company like that. What I do want to do is just start talking and writing and explaining and working through these ideas in public, and creating like cultural memes around a lot of these ideas that can kind of explode and grow on their own. And then my company or my podcast can help connect people who want to build these ideas and help fund them, and really start to build the tools. I kind of thought, I looked at Peter Thiel and I looked at Elon Musk, and it was like, I'm definitely a lot more of a Thiel. I get more joy from being like a Thiel than I do from being a Musk. I'd rather plant 1,000 seeds and spread my ideas out into the world and be able to fund them and believe in them and connect them than I do want to be the person that's just like fucking grinding and fighting reality like at all costs.
Wow, what a vision. You're visionary, and I'm curious to see how you got there. I guess it started with your father. And the things you create in your reality will ripple into your daughter's world. And I think so. Let's just go back to your father and his association with fear, because it seemed like he was pretty fearless, um, taking on opposition, trying new ideas, and spending all his money to just go like not living in lack or scarcity, just believing in himself and his ideas, and that rippled onto you, where you're able to take chances and go for your win, go for it, like listen to your heart,
Mhm.
even though you were confused at first, and were maybe pursuing a different goal when you got into pharmaceutics. Um, so yeah, let's talk about how you got pulled to like not follow your heart, and then how you got back onto your path, and how you've had a relationship with fear.
Yeah, that's actually pretty interesting because I do think the my decision to go do that was a very fear-based decision to go work in big pharma. Like essentially what happened was I when I was in college, I went to a really small school, all male college, and I had like a lot of success there, both academically, but also kind of within the college. So like within my freshman, sophomore year, I'd become like president of all the fraternities and kind of one of the main leaders on campus through that. I was running like multiple clubs, some like kind of businesses, like little fun business projects, was known in like the whole campus. And was kind of feeling like I was carrying the weight of the world of all these different organizations just because I was capable, and I just kept bearing like more and more weight and more and more weight. And my vision was like, I'm just gonna like carry all of this weight, do as much as I possibly can, like live life as hard as I can in a very like operationally productive way. Even though, but I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't like finding ways to relax, and I feel like my nervous system was just getting absolutely fried, and I was like super unhappy and getting like fat and just so tired and felt like I wasn't living for anything that I wanted. And my vision was I would just go like study abroad, and then I'd come back and just come kind of like chill my senior year. And I just happened to get this internship. It was the most competitive internship that you could get, the only kind of big company. It was a small all male school with 850 dudes. But we had like a huge endowment and like very successful alumni. But it was like kind of the best, quote unquote, best thing. And I didn't even really want it, but it just like seemed good. And my thought process, like, if I don't get the internship, I'm just going to stay in Europe over the summer and just go to like Copenhagen, just talk about entrepreneurial ideas and like get really into it. But I got the internship and I was like, okay, it'll be fun to go get some experience, get something that's not like kind of startup-y, something that's a little bit more corporate. And then I went and I did that. And all of that kind of intensity, kind of like when I finally came down from all of like the work and stuff, I just felt very confused and lost and tired and not that excited for the future. So when I got the full-time offer, I didn't really pursue any other opportunities. I was just like, I just want to relax a bit and chill.
Uh,
And so I did. I really took a very chill senior year. I did do one really fun thing that was pretty cool is I got really obsessed with this idea of taking all of the fear around environmental waste and this like macro creation of unsolvable problems that we had built up through the media, and what would happen if we flip that and turn it on its micro. And so basically I convinced 5 other kids to live in their trash for 8 weeks so you couldn't throw anything away. And we did this like multimedia documentary about our experiences living for weeks in these like in our own trash where we literally couldn't throw anything away that wasn't like biodegradable or toilet paper. And it was just like everything else we just kept in our rooms or in our cars. And you had to live with your waste. And it was a really cool experiment project. We called it Project Consume, um, that we did. And so that was like I put my efforts into that, but it was just kind of like cool. I'll just go make some cash. I'll chill and I'll figure it out there. And at the time, the only other reason I accepted it is my friend Derek Lee um, was supposed to be there too. And we were going to build companies together, and we had already had startup ideas. But then he ended up like reneging his offer and going to Altimeter Capital, which is like a very big VC firm, um, who is like now famous because of the All In podcast. He's one of the besties that comes in all the time. Um, so that kind of screwed up the path as well. But I ended up staying there for 3 years, and it was wild.
Yeah, you're there for 3 years, and then what shook you out of that trap?
The moment I got there, I was like, I'm fucked.
That
Like
you had,
everybody there was so nice. The problems that I was working on were strategically super interesting. So like the main positions I had there was like global pricing, reimbursement, and access. So I got to negotiate with like governments or be on the teams that negotiated with governments to get drug pricing done in other countries, which is way more interesting than the drug pricing in the US, which is kind of fucked to be honest. And then, but the global one was pretty fun. It was just strategically interesting. And then the other thing I did was like global branding. So I worked on a brand that now is, does over $1 billion a year, was kind of, it was my boss and I building out what we wanted this brand to mean globally. And that was like a really good experience to think about positioning and placement and competitive environments and, all of these different things that goes into building a really, really good brand, especially in pharma where it's hard to build good brands. But it was just such a bad fit. I had no interest in the political environment. Everybody was super kind and nice and fun, but it just wasn't for me. And there was just, I remember I'd gotten to a point where I was basically just done. Like I just wanted to do something different. And, uh, had become obsessed with podcasting. I started my own podcast, started listening to podcasts like an insane amount. And I'd emailed Ryan Holiday because he would just respond to people's emails, and I was basically like, "Hey, how do I want to get into podcasting. I want to like think about podcast and media. I'd read this book called The Brass Check, which was by far like the biggest Quake book of my life, by Upton Sinclair. And Ryan was like, "Oh, you should check out Gary Vee." And Ryan had just been on Gary Vee on his podcast, and I was like, "Dude, this guy's podcast like sucks. Like he sucks at podcasting," which I've gone on to actually enjoy Gary Vee a lot more. But at the time, I was like, "This guy's so annoying." But then the next guest he had, I think, was Aubrey and like two other people. Aubrey Marcus, who founded On It, and on that podcast, when I gave it, Ryan's like, "Give it another shot." Aubrey mentioned one of my family members, and I was like, "Oh shit, cool." So that basically like was able to leverage that connection to get into a room with Aubrey and basically convince me that I should work for him. And he or convince him that I should work for him. And he said he was interested, but I had to go work the front desk in the cafe first. So I quit my big boy pharma job, like bailed to and brought my girlfriend at the time, now wife, and we just moved down here into a really shitty apartment and we're like, cool, we're gonna make it work. And I started making smoothies at the On It gym.
yeah, a very entry level position from like a very a complete opposite, really, with the pharmaceutical company. Let's take a little sidetrack and get to your partnership with your now wife, who I think her name's Caroline. Caroline.
Yep. Yeah.
Caroline. And what inspired that relationship was also some article written by Ryan Holiday about how like a partnership could really be a benefit. So could you kind of get into that? I heard you talking about that on a previous podcast of yours I
Dude, I
listened
don't
to.
know where I talked about that. That's a deep fucking pull, bro. Yeah, so there was a damn, that's a lot of research, bro. Um, yeah, I think this is when I was study abroad. Like, I've never really my dad had me at 48. My parents have a phenomenal relationship. I grew up in a very stable relationship environment, but I've never really prioritized the idea of having a relationship. And then I remember coming back from Europe and I was reading like Ryan had written an article, it was like 20 reasons to get married in your 20s or something like that. And I read it and I was like, damn, dude, there's so many benefits I'd never thought about to having like more of a long-term relationship. Uh, and I was coming out of an all-male college with basically like not a lot of exposure to women. And Caroline, Caroline and I followed each other on Twitter for like a year without ever meeting. She came up in the algorithm of people like you should follow, and I just followed her one day, and I thought she was super dope. She was like student body vice president of Purdue, which is like a massive university and very challenging, but also a musician doing gigs like all the time. Very smart, very pretty, very fun, very funny, and I was just like, damn, she just seems cool as fuck. But we just never met or interacted. And then somehow, oh, some girl walked into my apartment or my friend's apartment in my apartment complex wearing one of Caroline's campaign t-shirts, and I tweeted it at her, and then she responded, and then we've literally just never stopped talking. I think the most amazing thing with Caroline is though, like we come from very different backgrounds, our values were so similar, which wouldn't have been expected based on her being like Midwestern and a few other things, and then me being like Hawaii, California, not Midwestern. But it was crazy how much our values aligned, and it was. She also felt like family immediately, like almost immediately she felt like family, which has been really cool.
What have been some of the biggest learnings you've taken from your relationship?
I mean, the number one thing that is coming up right now that's been just like so in my face over the last 5 months is just like how much it does matter the partner you pick, especially when you bring like kids in. And to like watch Caroline like be a mother and how great she is at it and how much that makes everything better in life is like wild. Like it wouldn't be anywhere as good if it wasn't for her. Anywhere near as good. And that's been huge. I think the other thing was she opened my eyes up a lot to she's not going to really love me saying this, but she did open my eyes up a lot to the idea that like conservatives or Republicans like aren't evil or bad or dumb, which is kind of how I was trained as a kid, is that like those people are dumb and evil and bad and racist. And even though she's not, but her family is conservative, it really opened my eyes up to the fact that, oh, I've been lied to a lot, and I just assumed that 50% of the US is bad when really that's just not the case at all. And we might disagree on a bunch of stuff, but they are pro America. They want to have a better future for everybody. And just because they're like Republican doesn't mean they're racist, which was something that I never thought would be a big deal. But the more that I've shifted my own view or become more aware of the influence of different groups on how we talk about politics in America, how kind of devastating it was for me to hold that belief for so long and why I can empathize with people who do hold it, but that basically it's my view now that where you're being told to hate your neighbor is where you're being controlled by outside influences, and really we're way more in common than we think from like a
I
political standpoint.
not only a political standpoint, but just a standpoint of being human,
Hmm.
period. I
Yeah.
feel, and that's a big learning that I've learned from the world of yoga, like something that I'm extremely passionate about. And like yoga is like the ultimate discipline of freedom. And when practiced as it's intended, which is so far beyond the physical posture is such a tiny piece of yoga. Um, we're able to transcend the world of dualities. So we become non-dualistic. There's no such thing as good or bad, um, hot, cold, rich, poor. Everything just is in the present moment, and just a complete surrender with great humility and faith to what is happening, and that it is all happening for you. Um, let's talk about dualities. What have you learned about dualities and non-duality on your path? And maybe psychedelics have shown you some of this as well, because that's been also a contributor to my worldview.
Hmm. I think that I've always been like really interested in dualities from like an artistic perspective.
Yeah.
I think that like the value of duality is it creates contrast, and within contrast you can have beauty and perspective. But I
Mm,
do like it's when people give overpower to the duality that I find it a bit concerning. It's like the tension of like yin and yang or the tension of these two dualities is a really beautiful thing to hold. It's when it becomes everything where it's like you push, it pushes back. And it's not like a game, it's force. I think
uh-huh.
that's where people have a lot of issues. And maybe where it can get a little bit extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. Personally, I'm trying to explore like both ends of the spectrum, to find the center, to find peace, inner peace, stillness in the center. Um, Despite the influence of the right side or the left side, uh, like undeterred, unfuckable with in the middle.
Hmm.
Um, can you relate to that? What brings you to that place of just inner peace and stillness, um, just deep presence in your life
Hmm.
today?
Well, to the like the unfuckable within the middle, that gives me this idea of like a Chinese finger trap a little bit, where it's like
Okay.
you want to have like equal tension on both sides, and then there's a lot of strength in that middle section actually. And I think most people use Chinese finger
Yeah.
traps as like negative metaphors, but I actually see it as a positive. And it's like if you keep those two tensions like perfectly taut, then it's very like strong. It's very kind of unbreakable. The really like the thing that is just giving me this an insane amount of presence right now is just having a daughter, having a child, like just how grounding it is when you hold them. And I picked up this idea from my friend George Mack, called the kale and cocaine phone. And so like basically you have two phones. One is just only things that are super useful. So it could be like ChatGPT, Google Maps, uh, stuff that you like need to Uber, like stuff you need to get around, but there's nobody has the number and you don't have any apps on it that would ever be kind of distraction based apps. And so like what I do is that, I usually will feed Athena either like the first round in the morning or the last round at night. And it's like anytime it's like I'm with Athena, it's just I only have my Kale phone on me. So it's just like I just increase the presence of myself. There's no way for me to be contacted really except for by Caroline in those moments. And it's just like those 1 to 3 hours a day of just doing that while also having whatever it is a baby does to you from a grounding perspective is like so present inducing, so relaxing, so fun. And I do think that like right now we are being combated against by the smartest people in the entire world to get your attention and constant attention. And it is kind of a war that we're having before we can mature with this. And the other side of that tension is that it's the most useful, powerful, like God-given gift of all time to have the access of the internet. And so just like trying to make sure I'm setting my life up in a way that I'm leveraging it versus it's getting leverage out of me and like working through that. And so Athena helps ground me a lot, but also then making sure I'm choosing tools correctly that it will help me also stay grounded, stay present. Because it's
Hmm.
wild how like if you start getting into like real holes, like REEL holes or like TikTok holes, like you like it just the energy suck. Like you just feel so fucking absolutely wrecked mentally and how easy it is to just build into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you, with the company you founded, Modern Stoa, you kind of leveraged those social channels to bring views and monetization to various podcast platforms. So you know how like you're kind of like the wizard behind like the Wizard of Oz, you know? Like you know how to puppet those strings. And so you know that it's effect on yourself as well. And one strategy that you use is the two phones. Like what are some other strategies where you're not where you're using technology to your advantage, whether it using you?
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to implement so many different things. The thing that does stick the most is the two phones, and I really think it's kind of the best path forward. It sounds maybe trite, but what it does is when you do have the Kale phone on you, you don't feel like you're like searching or lacking. If you are curious, if you want to look anything up, you can, but you're not. It's not, it doesn't feel like you're draining willpower. It doesn't feel like you're fighting uphill because you just actually have the Library of Alexandria at your fingertips versus all the things that pull us in, though are very necessary. And I've tried so many different things over, trying to mature and build this out. And this is basically the only thing I've ever had that doesn't feel like it's a battle. It just feels very easy to do. But different things that I've done that I think work really well is like, keep your phone on airplane mode if you're not going to do this until at least like 2 to 3 hours after you wake up, even if that means you have to wake up a little bit earlier. Same with like 2 hours before bed. Just giving your body the chance to just choose what you react to that's actually in your environment before you go and, see all the fucking dragons that are trying to kill you out there in the world allegedly. And that like however you can make that happen, I think is what at least has helped me the most, like calm down. I also would never call myself the Wizard of Oz. I appreciate that. I'm definitely not pulling strings, but I am aware of how to get people to use it a little bit more, and I know like how easy it is to leverage that towards people. So um it is crazy because you are battling so many people when you're trying to brute force this. And so figuring out tools that really have you creating over consuming is the way. And it's like another thing with like I think my daughter's going to mirror a lot of what I'm doing. So that's another reason why just trying to be super intentional around that stuff.
Yeah, very cool. And yeah, sorry, I wasn't calling you the Wizard of Oz. I just was saying like you know how that game works.
For sure. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So what are some other self-care fundamentals that you apply in your life today, whether that be physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, that like really help you stay grounded, so that you can best fulfill your mission as an entrepreneur, a podcaster, a husband, a father?
Yeah, I think I have a bunch of different things that I do. I'm definitely coming out of since just like kind of trying to just manage everything, coming out of a bit of a more chaotic time period in my life. Just a lot of personal stuff going on, then plus Athena on top of everything. But some of the things that I still do and have gotten immense value from in the past are like to do quarterly 3-day fasts. But leading up into it, I'll do like keto for 4 days, then go into a 3-day fast. Starting off those fasts every time, the very first thing we do is go through, and I'll usually do it with like one other friend, is we'll go through Naval Ravikant's Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. Because I think it's really important whenever you do something that could be stressful on the body, like fasting or like ice plunges, to do it from a place of love, not like hardness, not like this is going to be like, I'm gonna like force myself to do this, but really like to start almost like energizing your cells, that it's not a place of stress, but a place of like health and love. Um, and so we'll kick that off kind of day one and then go through that whole process. Usually we'll check in on some goals. The way I like to do goal setting is that I do kind of an intense either breath work or fasting or whatever around the goals. And then I just never look at them again. And it just feels like sometimes this takes a little bit longer for it to work out, but it also feels like it never is a grind to get the goal to happen. And it's like, yeah, I didn't get it done in a quarter or in a 6 months or even a year, but there's almost never been a time where I really put a lot of energy into thinking and believing and getting clarity on a goal that it didn't come to fruition in 5 years naturally.
Uh,
Um,
so this let me like inquire more about that. So you ask, you set the goal, you ask, and then you just allow yourself to receive that. You allow it to manifest. Where does action play into that?
well, it's
Aligned
so,
action.
yeah, I know. It's so funny because it's almost like it just kind of happens. Like, it's just like, it just happens somehow. It's usually once I've forgotten about it, and then it like, I'll look back on a journal from 4 years ago and it's like, oh, I've hit every single one of these goals.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's
What
like
do you?
I don't know. I've just never been able to stick to a plan, to be honest. Like, so, but it just kind of works its way out.
Hmm.
Like, I think I
I,
just do action every day, on like whatever is like present, whatever is like front of mind, whatever is interesting, whatever I want to learn. But it's like whenever I set like, okay, I'm gonna take Japanese 3 times a week, and then I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna cook this, and I'm gonna do that, and then this is my structure of schedule. Like, I can never keep to that. I'm just not that type of person. I'm not very like I can be very, very disciplined, but I'm just like whenever I try to over discipline my life, like it's actually worse, I find, and I still get the same outcome at the end of the day. Yeah, it's like
yeah.
I just kind of have like an open heart and just kind of keep working on what I want to see and keep talking about like the vision of the world I want to have. And it just seems to be kind of building itself out. And it's not to say that I don't like work a lot or I don't work on myself a lot, but it's just I don't really ever stay super structured to like keeping seeing that goal every day and like am I doing this and like focusing 100% on that goal. I'm kind of just open to it happening, and then it kind of seems to happen. Like Ryan and I talked about building a studio like 2 to 3 years ago, and I was just kind of like, okay, cool. And then we just never talked about it again. And then the studio popped into our lap, and I was like, hey, Ryan, you ready? And he's like, yeah. And it's like, cool. Now we have a studio.
Beautiful. So let's trace that. We go rewind it a little bit. So you just started it on it. You're working this entry level job, and you're wanting to get involved with Aubrey's podcast, and you do. You start working for Aubrey, and that leads to the founding of Modern Stoa, which leads to your podcast now. So let's trace that back. Let's kind of like see the intricacies of that and how it applies to like your principle that you just talked about. Like you set the goal and then you just allow yourself to receive it.
Yeah, so it's like I knew I wanted to build companies. Then I figured out I got a little bit more clear. I knew I wanted it to be in podcasting. So then I got a little bit more clear and I was like, what is the environment I can be in that'll put me the best environment that'll put me giving me the best opportunity to build companies within podcasting, right? That was like my only thesis. And it was like Aubrey saying my godmother's name on the podcast was like, okay, I have an in into somebody who's been in podcasting since the inception, has a great network, someone I respect, who I think is doing well for the world. Fuck it, I'm gonna go take that shot. Like I just all I knew is I just had to be in the room, be in the place, and I knew I'd figure it out like along the way. I think a
Yeah.
lot of this comes from surfing too. You know what I mean? Like surfing is such a great metaphor for all of these things because you can't really over engineer surfing. It's just like you just try and put yourself in the best possible decision you can, and then like you know, uh, salto mortale, take that leap of faith, leap of death, and just know you can ride that wave down. And that was my vision and goal for what I wanted to do around that was just I knew if I could get into the rooms, I could figure it out, and that's always kind of just been. So maybe the goal was like be in podcasting, but it wasn't like I'm sure I did write down I probably wrote down something like have X person on my podcast or like get to spend time or like help Ryan Holiday with something and like or whatever. And like all of those things just end up coming to fruition. But it just never feels like it's the way I thought it was going to be. But it's just like I wake
Uh,
up and look and I'm there.
uh-huh, uh-huh. Let's talk about faith. Take that leap of faith. And faith has played different roles on my journey. What does that mean? What does faith mean to you? Um,
Yeah, I've had definitely, I would say, a lot of faith, I think, has been something that's been very challenging for me, especially as a kid. I had like a lot of negative run-ins with religions or people who like working under faith.
yeah.
I think in this instance is I do really think that like faith is knowing or feeling or really believing that it's going to work out at some level, whatever that means, not being too attached. And I think that's what I'm describing. Is like I'm not super attached to the outcome. I know this is the direction I'm heading, and I feel very confident. I feel like I have faith that it'll work out, whether that means like I will be able to figure it out along the way and that it'll just work out. I don't have like a huge attachment to like God's going to make sure it works out for me because I believe in his path for me or its path for me as much, but I do kind of tend to have faith that if I have an open heart and good intentions, then things will work out for me and for my family. And even even though I've had some weird bad luck around some of like family stuff, it doesn't really feel. It still feels like it's all going to work out. It's just things can get crunchy and you have to bear the weight of the world sometimes. But I also feel like confident or feel faith that I have the capacity to do so. So.
Uh-huh. I feel like personally I see it there's two paths. We can see like our present is happening to us or against us, and it's just choosing one and moving and just surrendering to that path versus the other. And it just like that, we're constantly be pulled in both sides, and it just aligning in the one that feels right for our heart, I feel.
For sure. Yeah.
What role has psychedelics helped you with kind of this outlook of life and helps shape your vision for your life that you live today?
Yeah, so I am not that deep in psychedelics, which is surprising to most people based on the environment that I was in. I've only experimented with mushrooms one time. It was
Uh-huh.
massively impactful. Uh, I was with Eric, and it was very challenging in the beginning. Just the idea of it was very challenging. I have a lot of schizophrenia in my family, So I was a little nervous about that, but the experience was, it made me realize I needed to build my own company. I needed to leave Aubrey's team and like, kind of leap offward into it. And when I said that to Eric, it was so funny. He was like, I've never heard you speak with so much power. It was very, I would say, relaxing, like way more relaxing of an experience that really created a lot of depth of meaning and confidence in the direction that I wanted to go. And I felt like it was, super powerful. And I've watched it change so many people's lives. The reason I only did it that one time is that because the like the next night or that night when I woke up in the middle of the night with just like other voices in my head that weren't really mine, and those lasted for like a few days, and it was just like of my my dad's mom died in a mental hospital, schizophrenic. My uncle is schizophrenic. My both my grandparents from my dad's mom's side also died mental hospital schizophrenic. So I just felt like not really called to do them anymore after that point, um, because of that. And that's just kind of my own personal thing. But I've witnessed a lot of like experiences with people. I feel like I can tap into a lot of those states pretty easily. I feel like a lot of different breathwork ceremonies have had really transformative experiences. I think I have a really strong visualization capacity in my mind's eye that can get really wonky through like deep meditation and stuff. But yeah, that's kind of been my journey with it.
I appreciate your honesty with that. And yeah, psychedelics can be like a real tool for some people, but it also could be a real hindrance on one's journey. Whether that it like they just keep on going back to it again and again as like an escape rather than like integrating what they learned on into their now. What have been some other things you've seen in your personal life and just in like your world and the different industries you work about what hold people back from really like really pursuing and living their win like their full potential as you are in process of.
Yeah, I was actually talking with my friend Mark about this today. Like I think so much of it has to come back to like your parents and your family. It's amazing how I think the majority of people are being held back by themselves or by the past selves of their like ancestors and issues that they're just getting in their way over and over and over again. They walk into a room and instead of just being in the room, like they're going through like 10 different internal processes to try and just feel like they can feel comfortable in the room. And that's what then like
Hmm.
makes everything so much harder for them. And my friend Mark and I were speaking about this because we're both just like feel like we got so lucky with how our families behaved and how they treated us that we can feel so much more comfortable and like moving forward. So that's definitely one of the biggest things that I see hold people back. And I think the other thing is that is kind of combined with that that doesn't allow people to, really go for it is that they don't. I think it's just like not taking like a bunch of responsibility. I think it's when you kind of like outsource your reality and outsource your responsibility to other people, then it can be really hard to motivate yourself to move forward. Or it's almost even hard for the universe to conspire for you if you're not taking like an immense amount of responsibility. If you're always externalizing your faults and externalizing what went wrong in your life. But I do think it takes, either getting really lucky into what you're born into, or it takes, I think, a lot of work and confidence, internal confidence building. But to realize that like once you really start to take a lot of responsibility, then the universe starts to conspire for you.
Can you give like an example of that taking the responsibility, whether that's something that you've implemented or someone that you've studied or that you know, a really great example of wielding that power like to their favor or your favor?
Yeah, I mean, first person that comes to mind is Kanye West. No, I'm kind of kidding, but I'm kind of serious. But actually not going to go down that hole. Yeah, I think for me, what's a good example for me? Yeah. So I felt like going to pharma, and you probably heard even at how I said it in this conversation, was almost something that happened to me. I wasn't as much of a, I was like I was a victim, quote unquote, of my circumstance. It was a good opportunity, but I wasn't very intentional with it. It was kind of just like, oh, this is a choice. I'm going to make it. But I was never like, I'm making this choice. I want this. I need this. I'm going to take this thing. Whereas like quitting against, NBA track, great salary, all the good benefits, like great network, ego, blah, 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 being incredibly intentional, like, fuck it, I'm gonna go make smoothies. Like, I'm taking this responsibility. This is the life I want to live. I do not want to just blindly walk down this path into this other life. I want to like really pursue something that means something to me and then is going to like be in alignment with me and is going to be something that I can leverage to change the world into a reality that I want more for myself and my family and for everybody else. And yeah, and then I did it. And then it just like that's where it starts to happen. And I think that's what it is like having the capacity to own your decision and not say this happened upon me. And that's a very privileged example as I just gave. Like, ooh, he had a good job and then he got a worse job to get a better job. But I think that the kind of the logic behind it holds true no matter the situation that you're in.
Uh-huh. But then like it kind of replayed itself again. Like so when you were on Aubrey's team, like you were learning many skills. There's many benefits to that, but again, that's not like where you wanted to stay. There's a evolution, and then so you had to leave that, take responsibility, get out of there to create space for modern Stoa.
Mhm.
Um, what you would like to share a bit about that that part of your journey and how that has evolved?
Yeah, for sure. And I think every time you do this, it becomes easier and easier and more apparent and more apparent. I think the biggest difference between the Aubrey experience and the pharma experience, and my biggest lesson was the whole time I was in the pharma experience, I was fighting it. I didn't learn as much. I didn't do as good of a job. I didn't like perform as well. I didn't do all of these crazy benefits because I didn't want to be there. With Aubrey, I transitioned. I was like, I want to be here. I was stoked to be here, and I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can. And that's also what made it easier for me to leave faster. Is I felt like I'd learned enough, like adequately enough, and I had the support of Aubrey. I had made great relationships that I could go and build my next thing. And so it was taking the responsibility, diving all the way in, soaking it up, working, 60-day hour weeks, learning from Ryan, learning from everybody on the team, learning from every guest that came on, and learning as fast as possible. That just made all this iteration happen way faster. And then with my, as we started building out a network of some like the biggest health and wellness clients for Modern Stoa, it was like, cool, how do I learn from them? How do I grow with them? How do I build more things for them? And how do we keep working and building and going faster and faster and faster? And then, just really leveling up and setting myself up. And now I'm excited to do that for podcasting, to really take all the lessons I learned from like one of my best friends, Chris Williamson, who is like, if there's a professional podcaster out there, it is him. He's a professional athlete. And just learning how to get better as fast as possible, how to work on it and just become the best podcaster I can. And I'm excited to apply that level and that learning to this art and, take even greater risks and to bet on myself even more, to bet on myself as an artist, not just as a business person, is just something that is just increasingly exciting to me.
And one of the ways you express yourself in your art is through your podcast, your mental playground. How long have you been doing that, and what have been some takeaways you've learned from that experience thus far?
Yeah, I mean, we technically launched like a few years ago. Maybe it was 21, but it wasn't really meant to be like a podcast forever. It was honestly, I just wanted to launch the first long form podcast NFT. And so we did. And it was super fucking dope. And I really enjoyed doing that. And then it was like, oh, cool. Well, I guess I'll just like kind of casually keep podcasting just to the keep the engine running so that when I was ready to go full time into it, I could do that. Um, and then this year it was like, okay, I'm going to start really investing in it, really focusing on getting better and better guests, really focusing on turning pro, really taking it seriously. And so then now it's just going into this year. So I would say I really started it this year, but technically it launched like in 21, I think.
Okay, and your highest vision with the podcast moving forward in the year ahead and beyond.
Yeah. So my podcast is on a private feed mostly. Um, so you basically have to pay for it to listen to the full episodes. My goal is to get 10,000 paying subs. and people who are just very obsessed with these ideas around building new business models and media that aren't advertising, who are obsessed with creators and artists, who are obsessed with understanding propaganda and how we can think critically in the world and helping people build tools to do that. And to take that and to take the money from that podcast and take that community of people and start to build companies together that the podcast can fund and that um, I can like connect people who have similar ideas and maybe one's like perfect to be like the technical founder and one's perfect to be the business founder and then I can help fund them and help raise money through my network and we can go and build, all these different products out in the world through what the medium is of just memeing these ideas into reality.
Uh-huh. That's so incredibly exciting. And you couldn't have got here without like various mentors and helpers you've met along the path. You've mentioned so many, whether that be like your father, Ryan Holiday, Aubrey, your partner with your new podcast studio, Ryan Giles, who's been on this podcast, and I'm grateful to know. Um, yeah, let's just take a moment to acknowledge some of the key ones, and maybe you already mentioned them. Who were they, and what were the primary takeaways that you learned from these individuals that you've incorporated into the man you are today?
Yeah, I think it's crazy because I think in Mastery, Robert Greene talks about like having mentors that are from afar. And it's so funny how there is a mentorship that comes from being around somebody physically, for sure.
Uh-huh.
But really, I think my greatest mentors are the people that I've like learned from in history. And I think, that is going to be like Salvador Dali. It's going to be like Van Gogh. I think these are people who constantly iterated and constantly pushed themselves mentally and physically in order to express themselves at scale in absolutely stunning ways.
Uh-huh.
And those are the people that I think have mentored me like so deeply. Jack Butcher would be another artist that I feel like has we've talked a little bit, but we're not friends or anything. But he's like such a mentor to me, just in how he thinks and what he's been able to create in the world is just so cool to me.
Huh. It's very interesting. Like the first two that you mentioned, Salvador Dali, and Vincent van Gogh, I believe they're both only achieved success like posthumously, like after they died. If
Dali was pretty
I'm correct.
successful when during his life, but yes, very true
Okay.
for Van Gogh. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Both
another
of
one
them.
who really didn't get that much success while he was super alive is Duchamp. But yeah,
Okay. And I feel like the commonalities amongst like those two and a half, I guess, is they're just so deep in the process, and they were doing it to express them through their art. And they weren't worried about the outcome, kind of how like they're got it out of their own way to allow the creative process to unfold as it ought to itself naturally.
yeah, 100%. Like they had to make this shit. Like it had to come out of them.
Yeah.
It was just they're like just fucking going for it. And like Duchamp the most, where he would actually like middle finger the system that would give him praise. He would just go and fuck with them constantly. And people thought he was dead and people thought he like hadn't never been successful. But really he just wasn't chasing the same thing that everybody else was. And I think the world actually looked back at it and saw how original they could be because they were chasing that creation more than anything else. Like
Uh-huh.
Dali would like, instead of trying to go like steal art from somebody like Picasso or some shit, like he would just stay up for 3 days with a pan tied to the back of his chair so he could not sleep and just allow himself to be in like el estado de paranoia, which is like the paranoid state between sleep and awake, and that's where so many of his visions would come through. So he put himself into almost insanity to go and extract gold and then to come back and to display it for everybody.
Uh-huh. And that's often where gold is extracted from. It's from our hardship and our challenges. What has been like a hardship or challenge that you've had to overcome, Sky, that has given you great gold once you made it through to the other side? And how did you overcome that when in the thick of it, in the shit of it, and where it felt never ending?
Yeah, like so I was two kind of major issues that I've had from like 18 to like 29, have been around anxiety, paranoia, and then depression. And most recently had a bit of a mental breakdown in 2022, where basically I had gotten Modern Stoa to a place where uh, I was pretty chill. I was chilling. Like it was a place where I thought I was going to go build my next company. This kind of thing I've had a vision for years that I thought would be the thing that would change the world that I would build. And I was going to fly to Denver to raise capital at ETH Denver, Ethereum Denver conference. And it was I basically just had this thing where I couldn't get on a flight. I started having like crazy panic attacks. My heart rate was at like 130. I was freaking the fuck out, and flying is a huge part of my identity. Both my parents were pilots. My dad had a plane when I was a kid. I flew planes at 13. I've taken thousands of flights. It's always meant freedom to me and fun and excitement and adventure. And my name is Sky King. I'm literally named after a pilot like movie, and I just freaked out. I couldn't get on this flight, and I thought, you know what, this is fine. I'm gonna be fine. And then the next day, I go to get on the flight again, and I couldn't do it. And then I just go through this massive spiral where I start getting really, really anxious at all times, and I'm like paranoid. I can't eat food, thinking it's gonna be poisoned. I went out to Marfa to try and like collect myself, and I started seeing I started seeing stuff that was like breathing like you would on like mushrooms, or like I had on mushrooms before, like kind of like this almost thing. And I was like, oh fuck, did I get dosed with acid? And I'm just like feeling the weight of the whole fucking stars push down on me as I'm laying in this yurt like crying. And I just was losing my mind. And I know that it happens a lot to people when the kind of mental illness like schizophrenia sometimes does hit in their late 20s. And I was 29 years old, and I was like so sad. I was so sad that I had lost my mind and my ability to process, and that lasted for weeks and months. And I had to my wife was like so caring during the time and so patient. We had to drive to Portland from Texas, then we had to drive to Northern California from Texas on two separate occasions because I couldn't get on an airplane. I missed, one of my best friend's weddings. I missed bachelor parties. I missed all these important moments for people because I couldn't get on these flights to go to these things. And I was just like absolutely at a loss and was really struggling to kind of keep my shit together. Um, and the thing that I learned from that after I got better was just how much support I have and how many people that love me and how to like lead with vulnerability. And like, Chris Williamson was one of the first people to support me. He helped get me a hypnotist that would help me get kind of better. And it did, and helped me get on my first flight. And, someone who is like someone I worked with professionally and who is like kind of a rising star in the world, who I don't want to like look bad, but he was just an absolute brother to me in that moment and really helped support me through it. And Caroline and her family, who I thought wouldn't understand how crazy I was, like also loved me through it and didn't have any expectations and never saw it was like a forever thing, but that it was just a phase of something I was going through. That was so powerful. And then to, be able to lean on these people and get help and to talk about what I was struggling with. And I feel like, I'm so blessed because of being in Austin with all these great healers and great people versus like, if it was like 30 years ago, I bet they would have thrown me in a mental hospital and threw me on a bunch of drugs. And instead, like I was able to, work with my family and my friends to get better to the point where like I'm not worried about it at all and it doesn't feel like a reality at all. And I feel like I have the strength to keep going forward. And so that was pretty intense. And I think it really, really gave me the sense of how much I'm not an island and how much support I have in my life and how many people like love me and that will be there for me, which I think is a really important lesson to learn, especially if you feel fragile. And what's funny is that I'm so disconnected from that time in my life that when you ask, I didn't even think about that. I was just thinking about having like being depressed when I was 18. And then I was like, wait, I just
Uh-huh.
lost my mind 2 years ago. What am I talking about? Uh,
Well, I'm very appreciative that like for your honesty and sharing with that. And I think like it's so important to talk about our mental health struggles. Because when you're in the shit of it, like often you feel like you're the only one. And so often people don't reach out for help like you did. I'm grateful you're able to reach out. They don't reach out because they think they're the only one going through this. They don't want to burden other people, and it often has like very disastrous results. What allowed you to be able to reach out for help. And what advice, just wisdom you have for someone currently in that shit that have not yet reached their hand out and say, "Hey, I have a problem. I need help."
Yeah, I mean, it feels like you can't reach out to anybody, but that is really the most courageous act is to do it. And it would just be, believe in yourself, have courage, and, have faith that I think it's that once I gave other people the grace I would have given them to give me, I think that made it a lot easier. Because I've always thought that if it was reversed and Chris was the one having issues, I would have done whatever I could with no judgment. And for some reason, I had a different expectation that they would think that way about me. And really, like, because I know I would never do that. And so, if you somebody who gives people grace, then expect it back. And that makes it easier, I think, to reach out. It's easy to say reach out no matter what, but it is really hard when you're in the moment. It is scary, and the judgment of our peers is hard. But I definitely think, if anything, it just gave people a lot more comfortability with me. They felt like they could be vulnerable with me and more appreciation for me. So,
Yeah, thank you for that. You shared so much wisdom on this conversation as we explored your journey, the various highs, but also with the lows that you experienced and the uncertainties. Through all these highs and lows, through all these vrittis of life, what would you say has been the greatest life lesson you've learned on your path that you feel called in this very moment to share with me and everyone tuning in?
have kids, like full on. Like, I don't mean to be like oversimplify that, but if you have the opportunity, I would do it. It is a massive, massive force for good in your life.
Uh-huh. And can that also have a downside as well, where you lose your mission, your purpose, your value, and give it to like your children? Is that something like that happens? Like I think I see that happening.
Dude, I thought that would happen. I was worried about that. I just
Uh,
don't, that doesn't seem to be the case at all to me.
no, it's
You
the
have less
opposite.
time. You have less time, but you have way more motivation.
Mm,
Like, because I want my daughter to be able to be proud of me because I lived like an artist. I want her to
uh-huh,
be able to be proud of me because like the lessons I gave down to her were me really pursuing my mission. And like it's nothing but inspiration and focus.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
What three lessons would you want her to know, to embody?
I think it's that, man, three is hard. I think it's to, love something, like really fucking love something. Try and live a life of adventure and fun, and like know, and then know that you're loved.
Mm, it's a powerful feeling. Speaking of feelings, I invite you with this last question. Just really touch into how you're feeling, not in the present, but we're gonna fast forward. We're gonna fast forward into time, and we're gonna be sitting alongside an 85-year-old Sky King. Who is that 85-year-old man? Where are you? Who are you surrounded by? What is the legacy you've left in your 85 years? And what are the predominant feelings in your being?
Yeah, so definitely going to be around an ocean with hopefully grandchildren and family and friends, still physically able to, get in the water, not surfing any big waves, but able to, play around with my grandchildren, throw them on a surfboard, having some amazing ramen that was made by myself or a chef that thinks ramen is art, some beautiful sunsets, some sunrises, and just a lot of kind of familial joy. Proud for my impact on the world, happy to have existed, and excited for the next 30 years.
Beautiful. So I just invite you just to close your eyes and just really and like just really step into that 85-year-old soul. He's excited, present, He's surrounded by his grandchildren, family, friends. There's such a familial joy around you. There's the whiff of ramen and the ocean and the air, and you're at peace. And from that place of presence and of stillness, I want to bring you back to current day Sky. And that 85-year-old man, he whispers in your ear a lesson, a message. What does he tell you?
I'm getting breathe.
Hmm, great advice.
Mhm.
What does that mean to you, breathe?
At first, I was thinking like Wim Hof, breathe, motherfucker, but I think it's relax a little bit more. Just breathe, chill.
An invitation for us all. Thank you so much, guys. It's been such a pleasure to have like this conversation with you and just to get to know more about your incredible story and to reconnect. For people wanting to connect with you, they can find you on Instagram at I am Sky King. Um, your podcast is available on Spotify and all podcast platforms. That's Sky King's Mental Playground. Modernstoa.co. If they're interested in exploring that endeavor of yours, where else can they find you? And any last closing words?
Yeah, so then on X at King D Sky. And last closing words are like live like Luffy. If you haven't watched One Piece, go check it the fuck out. He is my spirit animal these days. Luffy D Monkey or Monkey D Luffy. And he the only dreams that he values outside of his own are the dreams of his friends, and he has so much fun pursuing those. So find a band of pirates to change the world with.
Mm, well, blessings on your journey, brother. To close the episode, we just bring it in for our digital bump.
Boom.
Boom. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek. Peace.